Everybody, and welcome to the Game Changers experience with myself, Adam Strong, and welcome to another fun-packed show. If you're listening to me live, as I say to each and every single one of you amazing human beings, use the hashtag live, use the hashtag replay. And if you, do you know what? One of the things that we love doing on live shows is we love PLC, post, like, or comment, or as I like to say, give us a like, share, or comment on the comment section below. You can do that there. And if you're listening to us on the podcast, of course, you can check out the show description notes below and any relevant links based on today's conversation. So what are we going to be talking about today? So believe it or not, I brought in a guest, okay, that we've had on board. And do you know what? It's interesting. The reason I brought him back on is because we have very similar core values, but also we share the same we share the same space as well in terms of business strategy and growing people's businesses. But Mr. Alex Brueckmann, by the way, who is German but based in Canada and stuff like that, he was on the show probably about, you know what, I don't even remember. I think it was about 150, 175 shows ago. So we're talking, you know, even probably the best part of a year and a half to a good couple of years ago. But things have really moved on since our last conversations. We're going to be catching up with Alex with regards to his new book. So if you don't know who Alex is, just a reminder for you guys that have listened to Alex before, you guys that are new to listening to our show, Alex is a strategy facilitator. He's a speaker and he's an author. And he's got two brand new books that's going to be coming out here in 2023, when you listen to this, of course. And his first new book, which comes out at the end of March, is called The Secrets to Next Level Entrepreneurs. And also towards the fall of 23, The Strategy Legacy. I love those titles. I think they're absolutely amazing. And, you know, you're welcome to connect with Alex over on social media. We're going to put all these links below at the end of today's show as well. Now, what are we going to be talking about today? So first thing we're going to be talking about is what is a next level entrepreneur and leader? I'm going to really delve in deep here, okay? And we're not going to be scraping. We're not going to be kind of like tipping the tip of the iceberg or scraping the cake. We're going to go and do a bit of a deep dive here because I feel like this is kind of an interesting question because, again, this is one of those conversations where we could go different directions, but I feel like this is what people need right now, especially if you're going through times of adversity. What is a next level entrepreneur and leader? What are some of the habits, some of the traits that you need to develop to become one? We're going to be talking a little bit about how did Alex, where did the whole kind of premise of the new books come from? So his new publisher is Wiley, a very reputable publisher in the industry, of course. We're going to talk a little bit about the backstory of the book. We're going to talk about some of the 3 different themes of the book, which is all based around hard skills. We're going to be talking about leadership and culture, and we're going to talk about self-care. That's a really big topic, especially for an entrepreneur and leader, because it's one of those neglected areas, especially if you're running your own business. Self-care is one of the neglected areas where if you're thinking in your mind, do you know what? I used to think, and to set the record straight, I used to think the harder that I worked, the bigger the reward. Now, obviously, that's not the case, but Alex is laughing here in the background, and I'm sure that he's going to be talking about this a lot. But we're going to have a really interesting conversation about that. So, listen, you know about the story, you know about today's conversations. Like I said, if you're listening live, use the hashtag live, use the hashtag replay. We love engagement, so we want to engage with you guys that are listening. If you don't get the opportunity to listen to our live video, you can go off and listen to this on your favorite podcast platform, whether it be Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon Music, whichever you prefer. And so that's that. And if you would love our conversations, we'd love it for you to subscribe. We want you to become a regular listener. Drive feedback to us. We love to hear. We actually have listeners in 52 different countries. We have thousands of listeners from around the world. So I'm ever so grateful for you guys that are listening in. So listen, enough me babbling on, okay? Let's bring Alex onto the show. Alex, welcome.
Thanks for having me again. And by the way, Adam, we're not only sharing the two things that you mentioned, we are also sharing the same hairdresser by the looks of it.
100%, 100%. Wait, for you guys that are, you've probably worked it out if you're listening on the podcast and not seeing the video, of course, but absolutely 100%. We definitely share the same hairdresser, 100%. Anyway, how are you since our last conversation? Because I mean, it must have been a good couple of years ago, right?
I think so, yeah. Probably 2 years. And I mean, those were 2 really interesting years for a lot of us. Depending on where you live and which industry you're in, you felt the consequences of the COVID years, more or less. But all of us have been through some really interesting ups and downs, I would say, over the past 2 years when it comes to the economy. When you live in the UK, for example, 3 prime ministers in the past 12 months. So it's just a lot of things that have happened around the world, let alone Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the everything that came afterwards in terms of how it impacted anything from energy prices to cost of living. And we are all feeling how the world is changing right now.
Absolutely. Everlasting. By the way, for full disclosure, for you guys that are listening in for the first time, this is not a political show. I just wanted to share that with you. This is a fun show for entrepreneurs and leaders that want to level up. So anyway, just to set the record straight. But anyway, we all know that. Yeah, so it's interesting because I mean, I know that we're connected over on social media and stuff. And one thing that kind of dawned upon me, especially when we had our first conversation, and I think this has become ever more so now, where, you know, one thing that I picked up from you in terms of your skill is your kind of way that you deal with adversity and resilience. Because, you know, I know that you're based in Canada, and I think, you know, a couple of years ago you were very much in a different place, whereas now it looks like you've kind of like maybe weathered the storm a little bit, and you've kind of had some epiphanies and things like that. Do you want to just kind of share maybe maybe share some of that story with us?
You're absolutely right, Adam. About 3 years ago, well, actually not about, exactly 3 years ago, was a time where like the world started to turn upside down with the outbreak of COVID, the first massive global outbreak. And at the same time, like a couple months prior to that, I was going through a very difficult time, emotionally speaking. The reason was I had just built or founded my new business at the same time where my girlfriend was going through a very difficult last trimester of her pregnancy. Then in January, my son was born 2 weeks after my own father died. And all these things happened basically within a period of 5-6 months. And then COVID hit. And that was not just COVID that hit. COVID hit us at a point in time where we were preparing our transition from Germany to Canada. So our move was planned for later in April. And then we were sitting on our kitchen table at the beginning of March, trying to figure out what we're going to do. And so we threw all those plans overboard, and that supposedly perfectly planned move went down the drain, and we had to decide within days what we're going to do, because airlines were just, they were not flying anymore. So 9 days later, we hopped on the last flight from Germany to Canada, and I immigrated. So I'm a permanent resident. My girlfriend is a citizen. But, you know, that's the reason why we had to pull it forward. The option was wait it out or go now. And wait it out was kind of very uncertain, because no one knew, is this going to take 2 months, 2 years, a decade? And when you are granted permanent residency in Canada, you have 12 months to immigrate from the time you have the permission to immigrate.
Right.
And so we had to take a decision. That's what we did. And of course, you can imagine how it feels to move under lockdown conditions into a foreign country with a newborn child, without the opportunity or possibilities to rely on family. And you just sit in your apartment day in and day out and hope that things get better. It was mentally a really tough spot. But on the upside, that gave me the opportunity to pour some of my ideas into book forms. And that's where the books originated, basically. It took a couple years to actually write them and then to publish them. But this difficult time, emotionally speaking, was the time where these books were birthed, basically.
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I suppose this is kind of where we share the same kind of similar story, emigrating to a different country. But yeah, there's a lot of what I call life stories, well, not life experiences, which you went through. Your dad passing away, to be newborn baby, and then emigrating. It's kind of like the icing on the cake, and then you've got COVID on top of that. There's a lot to deal with. Do you know what I mean? As like emotionally and mentally, that really kind of. What did you? I know you were talking about the birthing of the books and stuff like that, but in terms of like, obviously, that I know that you were kind of going through those tough times, but from an emotional, mental perspective, where did the whole kind of like ideology of writing those books come? Because, I don't know about you, but when you've gone through or going through stressful times, sometimes it's very difficult to get any clarity. Sometimes it can create brain fog, or sometimes it can, I guess maybe in your case, can create new ideas about, okay, well, this isn't a great place to be. Like, what do I do, type of thing? Like, how did you feel in that situation? Where did the kind of like flourishing come from?
The answer is yes, all of these. It was exactly how I described. So the idea for the strategy legacy came before we actually moved. The idea for the strategy legacy was born in the time when I decided to move to Canada. And I felt strangely guilty of leaving my clients behind in Europe while I was moving closer to those in North America at the same time. But there was still this feeling. And a friend said something like, you know what, get over it. Hand them a really nice farewell present, but you need to move on. And that idea of a farewell present kind of turned into, okay, the most helpful farewell present would probably be to write down what we did together so that they can replicate it without me in the future. And that actually became the basis, the fundament for the strategy legacy. Now, that was just a pamphlet of like 20 pages back then. So we moved to Canada, I parked it, I took it out of my pocket again, and then kind of I drove to Whistler, which is about 2 hours from where I live, and I just locked myself into a hotel room. In the summer of 2020, like Whistler was a ghost town, empty. So I had complete silence and peace to start writing, which wasn't possible at home because, 6-month-old baby. And so I started writing and rewriting, and the book started to develop and develop. The interesting piece is that, and that comes back to the brain fog that you mentioned, the interesting piece is only very few pages that I wrote in those 10 days actually survived. It was, I needed to start writing. I needed to get it out of my brain. And I think this is what this distinguishes a good book from a really good book, that you allow yourself to edit and re-edit with professional help. I'm not an editor, I'm a writer. So the editor helped me to distill the essence out of a lot of pages. And in the end, what you then do is you remove everything that is sort of a result of brain fog. But brain fog shouldn't stop you from writing. It shouldn't stop you from just making the next step, even if it's a difficult step. And even if you know that this might not be your best work, it still brings you closer to your best work. So I think that was the key learning for me, which I then used when I started to write Next Level Entrepreneurs. And these are very, very different books from a conceptual perspective, but also from a content perspective. And I'm really happy that I had this experience going through such a difficult time, writing, experiencing the quality of my own writing during that time, and then being able to use it as a jump off point to distill it and create something better out of it.
Interesting. I like that. That's very, very interesting. You know, I guess in times of resiliency or testing, or, you know, sometimes it can either make us or break us, right? You probably heard that saying before, but I guess for you, you know, you've learned a lot of lessons more than anything else, I guess, isn't it, during those testing times and whatever it might be. So, and thank you so much, by the way, for sharing that. 'Cause I know sometimes that can create maybe sort of, I suppose, memories that maybe you want to forget in a way, but then in other ways, I suppose you can kind of make it a blessing. What would you say out of the lessons from the last few years that you've taken? What would you say are the ones that you would, that are more blessings rather than kind of ones which you prefer to chuck in the trash?
This is a really good question. And I was asked a similar question by a friend about a year ago. And that conversation turned into what is the 11th chapter in the Next Level Entrepreneurs book, because I really didn't realize what, let's say, the blessings were. It just didn't come to me. I had to reflect with the help of a friend. And we realized that I sort of approached this difficult time subconsciously with completely different mindsets than my default mindsets. So I kind of, you know, that people often in stressful times, they fall back on their default modes. And for me, it was the exact opposite. I realized that the default modes wouldn't help me. So I'll give you an example. I am typically a person that deals with my emotions on the inside. I'm not carrying my emotions like on the sleeve, and especially when it comes to really like deeper emotions like grief and these emotions. And it was basically impossible for me to work through the feelings that came with the loss of my father and my first child being born 2 weeks apart. That was just too extreme. There was my father and I, we had a very special bond, and losing that was just devastating. And at the same time, I was overwhelmed with joy from becoming a first-time dad. And I mean, if you are like me and you typically deal with your emotions on the inside and you make sense of it on the inside and with yourself, it can be very daunting when you realize that you just don't, you won't make it. It's too difficult. And rather than shutting down emotionally or trying to suppress these emotions, the first time ever, I reached out and asked for help with these emotions. And that might sound like a duh for many out there, like therapists, psychiatrists, coaches, mentors are here to help. But for me, this was a first. And I was very proud of myself, actually, that I did that. And this mindset of abundance, that there is something out there that I can use, I just have to find it, kept me above water. And with the help of a therapist, I could make sense out of these emotions in a way that allowed me to move forward, not to like turn in circles and turn in circles and turn in circles. And that was something that I realized, and this is just one example. There were some other mindset shifts at play that I only realized in retrospect that helped me get through these times. And I strongly encourage, I'm a very facts-oriented person. I never thought that mindset shifts could make such a huge difference. But now that I've been through it, I'm like, okay, this definitely has a space in a business book. And that's why I wrote that chapter around it.
You know, it's interesting because, you know, that you're talking about two very extreme feelings, where the feeling of grief and the feeling of joy, and being able to manage polar opposites, because they are polar opposites in terms of a good feeling and a bad, or a bad feeling such. How did that from how did that kind of coincide with dealing with how you were emotionally? What did the ideology of writing the book of Next Level Entrepreneur, did that come later after, or what was that during the process of going through those, dealing with those emotions?
It came afterwards. The idea of the book came approximately a year later, when I was juggling a few ideas on how to grow into this new market. When you move from one continent to the next, all of a sudden there's a whole new market that you can grow your business in. And the idea was, hey, I want to bring people together that I know. I want to bring them together into a virtual summit. Back then, in person wasn't possible. So there was this 3-day business summit that I organized, where I brought some really bright minds together. And I enjoyed these conversations so much that I realized afterwards that there was, if I pieced some of them together, there is a red thread that binds them into a cohesive story. And I didn't see it back then. At that point in time, it was not the intention to write a book. There was the idea, yes, to distill a book out of that event, but you never know until you know. And once all these recordings were done and we had the sessions, and I read the transcripts, I realized that some of these hold so much gold that I wanted to package them into a different format, and that's where the book came from.
Love it, love it, love it. For you guys that are listening in, by the way, do us a favor. If you are listening to us, use the hashtag live, use the hashtag replay. And if you have any questions for Alex, by the way, feel free to put them into the comment section. And we're also streaming through YouTube and on LinkedIn as well. And make sure that also, if you are enjoying our conversations, hit the bell notification on the top right-hand corner of your screen and stuff like that. So it's really interesting. So I want to kind of like, what I was going to say, I'd like to really kind of get a distinguishing, because there's lots of different types of books, especially when it comes to entrepreneurial books, with a kind of like, I wouldn't call it a similar topic, but I suppose a similar kind of way in which there's lots of different books for entrepreneurs and for leaders. Let's distinguish. Let's get some clarity around what you, from your perspective, based on your life experiences and also the premise of the book, like from your perspective, what is a next level entrepreneur to you and a leader? What distinguishes them between an ordinary person and a next level one?
The biggest difference between, as you said, the ordinary entrepreneur and leader and the next level is, for me, a combination of a few characteristics. And the first one is the absolute focus on your intention. Why am I doing this? Why am I an entrepreneur? Why am I a corporate leader? Why am I leading people? Would I follow myself? If I took everything away from you, like bonuses and salaries and nice shiny offices that you could hand out as perks, would anyone still want to follow you? So asking and answering these questions and being fully intentional about why you do what you do, I think this is the first element. The second element is, this book does not celebrate entrepreneurship. It does not glorify entrepreneurship, and it doesn't promote the hustle culture. It is a book that goes way beyond that, way beyond the topic of making money. And like a lot of these entrepreneurial books, they are really centered around the few really ultra successful. A book that brings Elon Musk or Richard Branson as examples for entrepreneurs misses the point completely. This is like a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of entrepreneurs will ever reach that level. And for me, this is not even a goal, and not a reason you should become an entrepreneur. So understanding that building successful businesses is not around making money, but around adding value to society, to the planet, to people in general. This is something that distinguishes next level entrepreneurs from, let's say, the more hustle culture entrepreneurs, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Do you know what? It's interesting because, well, I suppose we could talk about this because I don't know about you, but the whole kind of, I feel like the whole kind of hustle culture of entrepreneurship has kind of faded away. And I feel like, especially over the last sort of couple of 2 to 3 years, and people have had time to, reflect on their own kind of self-awareness, what strengths and weaknesses about themselves. But I feel like a lot of people kind of come back to, they're always going to be the sleazy salesperson out there. There's always going to be, do you know what I mean? They're always going to be out there. But I feel like authenticity and being integrity led is a bit more kind of in tune with today's world. What's your take on that?
I wish I could mirror that, to be honest. I unfortunately I don't see it. I don't see
you don't
it
see it. Okay, fair enough.
And it heavily depends on where you look.
Yeah.
I think in the more traditional European countries, that is certainly true. I see a lot, like over the last decade already, a lot of larger companies investing into their leadership to raise it to the next level. Whereas here in North America, there is a very predominant culture around hustling still existing. It's like chasing the dream, chasing the money. It's people generally, when they go into business, at least that's my experience, they don't ask themselves too deep of a question whether they should do that or not. They just see an opportunity and grab it, and it's often centered around making money. Now, that is not a bad thing at all. I'm not judging, I'm just observing, and I see that a few years in, many of these entrepreneurs realize that they don't enjoy what they do. And that's when they start to roll back and when they start to rethink what it really is that they want to do. And then they realize what the impact is that they can have, and they rebuild how they approach business.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I suppose because you're based in North America now, and obviously, you're theoretically a European that's moved to North America fairly recently. And I believe, and I can't remember where I saw this, but it's the Chinese and the Americans are the hardest working workforces of the planet, if you like. So I guess that's kind of where the whole kind of hustle culture has come from, because it depends on, if you look at somewhere like Scandinavia, for example, they value the whole kind of diversity, work-life balance, but Americans and people in North America kind of laugh at that type of premise because it's not something that you know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like different cultures, different, it depends on where you are in the world, I suppose, is going to have a different direct answer to that, I suppose, in a way.
I agree. When you take a look around European countries, the whole question of how much do you actually work? Like in France, they are currently heavily debating whether they should raise the retirement age to, I think it's 65 or 63, something that is so ridiculously low that you should ask yourself, why is this economy not collapsing already? And we're talking about 35-hour weeks, 4-day work weeks, all these things. And that's all fine as long as your economic and social fabric supports it.
Yeah.
The US, for example, is built on an entirely different promise. It's not so much about paying into Social Security and then enjoying the fruits of your labor later. It's way more entrepreneurial also for regular employees. How much you're responsible for your own well-being, it has a totally different meaning in the US than it has in Europe. And I don't think that many people are aware of these massive differences, especially not in the workforce. when I work with international businesses, it's often really revealing when you have people from Asia, from Europe, and from the US, for example, in one room when they form one leadership team, how extremely different these people approach, for example, the topic of vacation time, the topic of downtime in general. And I'm not judging, I'm not condemning, I'm just observing and seeing what these different habits lead to. And when it comes to leadership and entrepreneurship and just the corporate world in general, I just see how detrimental to your health, both physical and mental health, this can be if you are not able to create strong boundaries and protect yourself. And I think this is, as such, a flawed concept, because work is part of life. The problem is when it becomes such a big part of your life that it just suffocates everything else. And then you start to protect your personal life in a way that you don't want your work life to intrude into that personal space too much. And that's when you lose balance. That's when you see the two against each other and you try to chase something elusive like work-life balance. That whole term is just nonsense, because it just all of a sudden, it's a term that you shouldn't use. And I think it just shows that if we understand work as something that is opposed to life, we try to balance them. We try to protect them from each other in a certain way, which just doesn't work. We bring ourselves, our full personality to work, and we take everything from work back to where we live, to our families. So rather than trying to create something as like work-life balance, we should better understand what really matters to us, what we let into our lives, what we allow into our lives, and create life balance as a whole, where work plays a certain role or not, depending on your personal preference.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Now, I know that we're kind of coming towards the end of our interview, but I know that there are 3 themes around the book. And I'd love to, again, get your feedback on this, because you've written the 3 themes are hard skills, which is maybe you could give us a little bit more elaboration around that, leadership and culture, and self-care. Tell us about the reasons why you feel those 3 topics were very much in tune with the book that you wrote, and what's the reader likely to get out of those 3 particular topics? Why do you think they're so important?
I've been working as a strategy facilitator, as a leadership trainer and executive coach for the better part of 2 decades now. And it doesn't matter where I work, in which country, on which continent, the leaders I work with, business leaders I work with, all of them struggle with at least one of these themes. And when it comes to hard skills, what I mean is, at some point in your career, either an entrepreneur or as a corporate leader, you realize that there are skills that you should have that you do not. And they prevent you from getting a seat at the next table. And examples include, how does the whole topic of sustainability impact our business? How do you actually create a thorough business strategy? I'm not talking about a marketing strategy or an HR strategy. I'm talking about the overarching concept of a business strategy. We grow within our subject matter expertise most of the time. So at some point, we have to look left and right. Otherwise, we are not able to contribute to leading a business in a broader sense. And also the topic of pricing. A lot of businesses that I work with struggle with strategic pricing. So that's why I brought these 3 themes into the book and invited some of the brightest contributors to write these chapters. So, for example, the topic on strategic pricing was contributed by Professor Dr. Herman Simon, the founder of Simon Kucher and Partner, the leading global consultancy in that space. So it's really interesting to read these chapters. You can read the whole book cover to cover if you want, but you can also just go back to each individual chapter, read it as you feel you need it. For example, in the second theme, when we talk about leadership and culture, we just offer different perspectives on how you can lead yourself and your team through challenging times. what disruption means. How do you use it to create impactful work cultures that are able to innovate even in these difficult times? So the whole topic of leadership and impact culture plays a significant role in chapter 2, in theme 2. And theme 3, as you said, Adam, is all around self-care. And there we talk about creating life balance, embracing these mindset shifts that we talked about earlier, and just realizing who you are as a full person, as a starting point for creating the life that you want. And I feel that, especially when it comes to corporate leaders, when it comes to entrepreneurs, we often sacrifice so much of who we are in the process of chasing something that we feel we want, and in the meantime cause so much collateral damage for others, but also for ourselves. And this often happens, especially when I talk to men in their late 50s who realize that retirement is coming closer, that they don't have a tight-knit circle of friends, that they neglected their hobbies over the past 2 decades. They don't even know how to hold a golf club anymore. And they love playing golf, or whichever other sport you want to use as an example. And I think these topics are so key. Just because you lead a business doesn't mean you have to neglect yourself. But still, a lot of us do. And I'm pointing the finger to my own nose here, because I've been guilty of these behaviors as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because what you're sharing is effectively something that you've experienced yourself and gone through yourself, whole life experience, but also you've showcased different perspectives from expertise, expert in that given area or field. Is that right?
Correct.
Love that. Love that. Love that. Well, listen, I know that we're kind of pretty much out of time, and this has been such a great, I suppose, call it a catch-up show more than anything else. And what I'm loving about this conversation is that, you know, since our last conversation, which was, I don't know, 150, 175 episodes, I can really see that from my own perspective, from the outside, you know, telling you as a friend, of course, I can really see that you've really grown a lot. Like, and I'm not just talking like technically knowledgeable wise, but also emotionally intelligent wise and self-awareness wise. And, you know, you've really grown, what I'm trying to say to you. And you're really,
thank you, Adam. I appreciate that,
if you like. So, you know, so I just wanted to kind of say that, by the way, just wanted to, as a great summary to summarize today's conversation. So I just wanted to say that.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Adam.
You're welcome. Well, listen, guys, hope you've enjoyed today's conversations with me and Alex. If you want to, if you'd like to learn more about Alex's book, which is going to be coming out very, very soon, please check out the link below, pre-order your copies below, depending on when you listen to this, of course. And again, whenever you're listening to this, Alex has been very kind to offer his first free chapter for free. If you want to check that out, the link is below in the notes. If you listen to this on the podcast, of course, feel free to connect with Alex over on social media, of course, LinkedIn, YouTube, that kind of stuff. Feel free to, and also if you have any questions for him, mention the podcast, of course, because then he can kind of put 2 and 2 together. So for me and Alex, I just want to say thanks very much, guys. Alex, I just want to say thank you so much for being on today's show.
Thank you for having me again. It's been a real pleasure talking to you again.
Likewise. Listen, guys, hope you've enjoyed today's show. Please do me a favor. Please write a 1 or 5-star review over on Spotify, over on Apple. Hopefully you'll come back for another great show on the Game Changers Experience. Take care. And from me and Alex, see you soon. Cheers, everyone.